I'm looking at a bunch of stories here. For example, the Washington Post, Valerie Strauss wrote a piece in yesterday's newspaper titled "The Education Mess in Ohio Under Governor John Kasich. Scandal-ridden charter school sector, budget cuts for traditional public schools, increased funding for charter schools and vouchers, controversial state takeover of failing schools, questionable teacher evaluation system, botched administration of Common Core." And it goes on and on. And I wanted to get somebody from Ohio who really knows this stuff and knows what's going on. And what's the deal with Governor Kasich and more broadly, and not even to specifically speak of Governor Kasich, but to speak of the charter schools. That in fact, it's my understanding that the lottery in Ohio just showed a record profit, which is supposed to go to education. But because the total amount of the lottery profit was less than the total education budget, the governor has simply moved that money into the education budget and then moved money out of the education budget into other things. So there was actually no net increase in education spending, which is totally bizarre. Anyhow, Congressman Tim Ryan is with us. He represents the 13th District of Ohio. timryan.house.gov is the website. Congressman, welcome to the program. Welcome back to the program.
Yeah, good to be with you. Good
to have you with us. So tell us about charter schools. I don't know how much you want to get into this in the context of Ohio or John Kasich, or it'd be more general. It's up to you. But what's the situation here?
Yeah, well, we've always had an issue with charter schools, and even the National Charter School Associations have said things like Ohio is the wild, wild west of charter schools, meaning no regulation, lots of money, a lot of kind of pay to play where there's a couple big donors who have given, $5 or $10 million to the legislator, the governor, the rest, and then they get these very lax regulations. So this kind of we knew about this for years, but then it all came to a head when the U.S. Department of Education said that they were going to give the state of Ohio a $71 million grant for its charter school system. So this raised some red flags because there was a lot of scuttlebutt about what was happening with the charter schools and lack of oversight and all the rest. So I sent a letter to Arne Duncan at the time calling on them to put more stringent restrictions on the money that they send to places like Ohio. My concern was, I sit on the Appropriations Committee here in Congress, that we send money to the Department of Education. They send it to a black hole in Ohio where there's no oversight. So we wanted to get a hold of the grant application, the original grant application. So this started a pretty big firestorm. And then we found out that the Ohio Department of Education director, David Hansen, who happens to be Kasich's wife's campaign manager, or Kasich's campaign manager is his wife, he ended up being forced to resign in July because he mishandled the evaluations that he sent to the Department of Education on the charter school. So long story short, we find out in a letter from the Ohio Department of Education to the U.S. Department of Education, when asked to resubmit the application, all of a sudden there was a finding of 57 failing charter schools as opposed to the 6 that they said were in their original application for the $71 million grant. So it's 10 times as many charter schools were found to be failing in Ohio than the original application that they sent in. The high-performing charter schools went from 93 in the original application to 59, down 36%. So they completely cooked the books to try to get this grant.
Wow. Are they still getting the grant?
Not as of right now. Not as of right now. So this Ohio Department of Education just resent this just a few days back, and the January 29th they sent all this new information that had these changes. I think they're going to still try to attempt to get the grant, but we're going to stay on them and bulldog this thing, and not until things are right over at the Department of Education. Now, not to broaden the discussion, Tom, but I know you've have been talking about what's going on with the water issue, and for example, in Sebring, Ohio, which is a similar situation with lead. We have the Ohio EPA knew that there was lead in the water as early as August and didn't tell anybody until about January.
Did the governor know?
Well, I'm pretty sure he knows because he got asked about it in New Hampshire, but he was saying everything was going just fine, and I beg to differ. And quite frankly, he hasn't been around. So, that's part of the issue. I think the culture in these agencies and these departments aren't what they need to be.
All right. Back to charter schools for just a second. What is the philosophical? I've heard basically two arguments for charter schools over the years. One being that it'll stimulate and break up is the wrong word, but produce some change basically in a calcified or ossified educational system. And the other being that, hey, if you can do things for profit, the profit motive is always superior to the public motive because it produces efficiencies so that you can skim some of that profit off the top. And there's probably other arguments that are being made by the Gates Foundation and others who are big fans of charter schools. What's your take on charter schools versus public charter schools?
Well, we have a blend in Ohio, and I agree with the idea of the competition. Where I have a real problem is where there's a profit motive.
Yeah.
I just think in education you can't have people making money off of kids going to school, and to me that violates the basic agreement that we need to be putting all the resources we can into education, paying our teachers what we need to have. I think in some ways it'd be very hard to turn back some of these issues, but I don't have a problem necessarily with the public charter schools where they can get a little more creative and maybe try some things that otherwise wouldn't be tried, or you want to do a STEM curriculum, or you want to do arts and music and things like that, where you can maybe kind of give kids options and kind of drill down and go a little deeper with some of these schools. Mm-hmm. I think that at the end of the day, that could be a good thing, but it needs to be well regulated. And the real issue in Ohio is the private charters, because, as I said, you have people donating lots of money to the public officials, and then getting the regulations to become more and more lax, and the oversight to become more and more lax. And then you get what we have in Ohio, where you get guys blatantly cooking the books to get kind of get federal money and make it look like at the end of the day that these schools are doing such a good job, and at the end of the day they're not doing such a good job. So I don't have necessarily a problem with the public. It's the private that are maddening.
It seems to me that our public schools really began falling apart after the Reagan era, and the line that I would draw back to that is twofold. One, Reagan basically stopped our investment in infrastructure and schools, building new schools and things. There's certainly infrastructure, but secondly, that was when poverty began to increase. Reaganomics, salaries have been basically flat since 1980. Poverty has been going up. The cost of living has been going up, but wages haven't. Shouldn't we be looking at the underlying cause of school failure, which is poverty?
No question. And at Youngstown State University a few years back, a professor there did a study and tied socioeconomic status directly to educational outcomes. So there's no question about it. Not having, a fresh food, fresh fruits and vegetables and kind of lean meats in these schools, so that these kids have an opportunity to eat the kind of food that's going to give them a high level of energy. Not in one of our schools in Youngstown, I was just talking to a counselor. They get a Rice Krispie treat and a chocolate milk for breakfast, and then third period the kid crashes and wonders why he can't learn math. Well, right. It's pretty simple. So I think it's got to be in the neighborhoods, but it also needs to be food in the schools. And then, as you and I have talked about many times offline, we know so much more about how the brain functions today. And we've been advocating very strongly here in D.C. for more investments in the social and emotional learning, which can help tune your brain up, make sure you can calm down the old part of your brain, your amygdala, and be able to really tune up and access your executive functions in your prefrontal cortex. And if we don't understand that that's fundamental to learning, that that's actually the common core, then we're not going to be able to get these kids, not only out of poverty, but to have any educational attainment at all, and not even to be good citizens.
Totally agree. Congressman, we're out of time. Thank you so much, Congressman Tim Ryan. Thanks for being with us.
With you, Tom.
To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here. And please be sure to hit the handy-dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.